Welcome to Grand Canyon University Canyon Professional Development. Today we will be focused on Topic 1, Introduction to Social Emotional Learning. My name is Wendy Norberg. I'm currently an instructional coach with 23 years in education in various roles. Participants will define social emotional learning. An additional course objective will be that participants will identify and provide examples of the 6 core competencies in SEL, as defined by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Participants will identify the settings SEL can be taught in. In addition to this, they will identify the benefits of social emotional learning. Take a minute to reflect on how you would define social emotional learning. A little background before we go over the definition that CASEL has created for social emotional learning. In 1997, the Reauthorization Act of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, called for positive behavior intervention and support, PBIS, to ensure students with disabilities were not excluded from educational opportunities due to behavior disorders or issues. It soon became evident in school settings that the SEL interventions worked well not only for the identified students, however, they worked well for all students. Since then, there has been a shift in the approach of PBIS to more of a school-wide approach. This has created the foundation for SEL in schools. This definition is rather lengthy, however, I think it's important to encompass all of the aspects that SEL instruction entails. CASEL defines social and emotional learning as the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. In a moment, we will look at the five competencies encompassed in the definition, and you'll see that all of those competencies are exhibited in this definition. Ultimately, SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school-family community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. Here you can see a graphic that was created by CASEL. The orange areas identify competencies that deal with ourselves. Yellow involves competencies that deal with ourselves and others, and green are competencies that really affect or that really are determined on how well we are successful with them based on our interactions with others. In orange, you can see we have self-awareness and self-management. In yellow is responsible decision making. In green, we have social awareness and relationship skills. The blue circles surrounding this graphic show classrooms, schools, families and caregivers, and communities. These are the settings in which SEL instruction and interventions can take place. We'll look at those a little bit more in a while. The first competency we're going to look at is self-awareness. Self-awareness involves the ability of students to demonstrate character traits such as honesty and integrity, identifying personal identity, beliefs, and values they hold to be true, understanding their personal thoughts and feelings. As we're going over examples and parts of the competencies, I want you to take a minute to reflect on where you would lie in the development of this competency. Students work on knowing their strengths and weaknesses. Do we as adults understand our strengths and weaknesses? Probably one of my favorite and one of the most important aspects of this competency is identifying if one has a fixed or growth mindset? Are you willing to learn and take risks? Are your students willing to learn and take risks? Finally, we have understanding how behavior is influenced by thoughts, ideas, and biases. As educators, it is imperative that we are not only aware of our thoughts, ideas, and biases, but that we help our students to see that they have certain thoughts, ideas, and biases as well. The next competency, again, this is an orange one, so this has to do with ourselves, is our self-management skills, or our students' self-management skills. These look at the ability to manage emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. So once we've identified our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, how are we able to manage them? How are our students able to manage them? Are we able to regulate behaviors and emotions? Are our students able to do that? How self-disciplined and how self-motivated are we? How about our students? Do our students take initiative? The organization of their time and space is considered in this category. This includes their desks, their backpacks, any materials they might have, a school locker if they have one. Are students able to plan effectively? Do they have the ability to set goals for themselves and for groups? The groups they might be a part of might include teams, it might include their classroom, clubs they belong to. The next trait was a yellow one. So this involves not only ourselves, but how we interact with others. And it has to do with responsible decision making. Are students able to kindly and effectively make positive behavior choices? Are they able to interact appropriately with others in all settings? Are they curious and open-minded? Are they able to understand others' perspectives? This shows up in responsible decision making, and it also shows up in in our ability to work with others. We'll see it in another category. Are they able to identify solutions? Do students understand that each decision and action has consequences? Is this something that we model for students? Do our students understand how decisions and actions impact others? Do they use critical thinking skills to make decisions? In thinking about making decisions and identifying solutions, are our students open to more than one solution? Are they open to listening to others? The next category, which was green, has to do with relationship skills. Are students able to develop and maintain healthy relationships? In another module, we're going to look at ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and discuss how this affects a student's ability to develop and maintain healthy relationships. As educators, one of the greatest gifts that we can provide for our students is a stable, accepting environment. Are students able to navigate diverse social settings? Communicate effectively? Work with teams and solve problems collaboratively with others? Are they able to make positive choices regardless of pressure from others? To navigate conflict constructively? Conflict will always abound. It's not so much that it has occurred, but rather how we deal with it. Are they able to show empathy for others? And our final competency is social awareness. Do students understand the perspective of others? Are they respectful of others' perspectives? Earlier, we talked about recognizing strengths and weaknesses in themselves. In this area, they might recognize it in others. Do they celebrate others' strengths? Do they encourage others in areas they might be weaker in? Do our students and do we show compassion and empathy? How about gratitude? Part of social awareness is being able to identify social norms. For example, a student raises their hand in the classroom, but at home or on the dinner table, that's not what occurs. Do students recognize certain opportunities are situational? Do they take advantage of those opportunities? Do they try to create those opportunities for others? And are students aware of influences of systems on behaviors and social norms? what's considered acceptable. All of these 5 social competencies are part of what make up the definition of social emotional learning. That social emotional learning can take place in classrooms, schools, homes, and communities. Notice that in the center of the circle there's an arrow which is continuous. This learning is constantly evolving, constantly changing, and always taking place. It can be dependent upon what's happening in the community, what's happening in the classroom, schools, and homes. In the classroom, this involves SEL instruction. CASEL puts out a guide each year, and in it they rate the effectiveness of curriculum, strategies, and other interventions to teach social emotional learning. It's a great place to choose some evidence-based social emotional learning practices. The classroom climate is also determines the SEL that takes place. Are the competencies modeled and accepted in the classroom? In schools, the school-wide culture is an example of incorporating the competencies. Practices that take place in schools, and policies. While policies are often created at the district level, it's the responsibility of the schools to share the policies with others and to ensure that the policies are being followed. In homes, are authentic partnerships created with the classrooms, schools, communities, workplace of the parents, workplace of teenagers, clubs, other opportunities to volunteer in your community? This might include religious affiliations as well. Finally, we have communities. Are there aligned learning opportunities for social emotional learning between what students are learning in school, what they're learning at home, what they're learning in their individual classrooms? Social emotional learning is most powerful when it takes place in all 4 of and is celebrated and honored in these settings. As classroom teachers, we have the opportunity to make up for maybe holes in the student's life where they're not receiving this instruction. Keeping in mind that it needs to be geared towards the needs of our students and respecting the wishes and beliefs of our families. Let's look at some benefits of social emotional learning. As educators, we often find that we're feeling pressure to teach more and more and more, and our time seems very limited. However, when looking at the research, it becomes evident that time spent on social emotional learning is extremely important. I picked just a couple key areas where I think that educators could see the benefits. The first one being improved academic outcomes and behaviors. Students' academic performance is increased by 11% when SEL interventions and instruction takes place. Classroom behavior improves. The student's ability to manage stress is increased. Anxiety is decreased. Students have better attitudes about themselves, others, and school. We know that education and learning is made much easier when a student wants to be at school, feels good about being at school, and feels a part. There are also long-term and global benefits. Up to 18 years after social emotional learning has taken place, adults report higher levels of well-being. Social emotional learning is effective across cultural contexts. However, it should be noticed that the largest effect size occurs when interventions are designed with a specific context or culture in mind. Just as our academic interventions are differentiated, so should our SEL interventions and instruction. 2 other benefits are wise financial investments and the fact that it improves lifetime outcomes. There is a return of $11 for every dollar spent. There's a significant association between kindergartners who have developed social and emotional skills at a young age and the outcomes for them as young adults years later. There is also a decreased likelihood of being involved with police before adulthood or spending time in a detention facility, which goes back to the return of $11 for every dollar spent. I want us to take a minute to think about this. SEL programming can have a positive impact up to 18 years later on academics, conduct problems, emotional distress, and drug use. As educators, our goal is to create lifelong learners, and I think this is one of the best ways that we can do it. 90% of elementary and secondary teachers agree that promoting SEL would improve students' academic achievement. That's a win-win for our communities and for our students. Teachers who report higher levels of well-being report engaging in SEL practices to a greater extent than those with lower reported well-being. Which brings us to our next slide. As leaders in your community or in your schools, we can continue to teach educators why. Why are we teaching SEL? Educators can continue to learn how others are teaching SEL skills, keeping in mind that we are all responsible for modeling, teaching, and reinforcing the expectations. Remember to take it slow. Spend time discussing the importance of SEL for yourself and for your students, especially if the idea of SEL instruction and interventions is new to you. Allow time for discussions, both personally and professionally. Finally, take care of yourself. Practice implementing SEL skills in all 5 competencies. As noted in the previous slide, teachers tend to teach SEL much better when they've worked on it themselves. Keeping in mind that if it improves the educational outcome for our students, it most likely will for us as adult learners as well. Additional course handouts are made available, and you can find those in this module. We hope that you'll subscribe for free PD. And if you would like to create a customized professional development program, please contact us here. Thank you for joining us in Topic 1 today, an introduction to SEL.